At finehomebuilding.com, we've taken our 40 years of experience publishing an expert-written magazine for architects, designers, builders, remodelers, and do-it-yourselfers, and used it to build the best online membership available to anyone interested in high-quality, high-performance homes. With an all-access membership, you can read 40 years of FHB print issues, watch hundreds of in-depth how-to videos, follow the annual FHB house build, plan your next project with our new project guides, and much more. Visit finehomebuilding.com to sign up for All Access, the most important tool in your toolbox. I don't know what he said mostly, but I think I get most of it.
90% of that went over my head, but man, I believe every word of it.
It just reinforces my regret for not becoming an engineer, because I'm not smart enough to follow everything he was talking about, but I could listen to him talk for hours.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. Today I'm joined by producer Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
FineHomebuilding.com editor Rob Watzak.
Hello.
GBA senior editor Kiley Jacques.
Hello.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. My God, for maybe the first time in the years I've been doing this now, I felt like I knew this script like by heart. I don't know.
It did fly off your tongue.
Come on, you always sound like a pro.
It makes me really stupidly nervous. I don't, I could recite it to you, out here without thinking about it. But
that's the trick. Don't think about it.
Right.
Well, Rob, we got to talk about something. Let's just get this right out in the open. You're making a big change, right?
I am making a big change. Yeah, I hope to be continuing to work with you guys as much as possible, but I'm not going to be the editor.
And you can hear our hundreds of listeners going, "Oh no,
another one down."
No, well, you guys hear all about my crazy projects, whether they be the metal craft or restoration carpentry, and it's something that I've done. Aside from fine home building editing, it's the thing I've done most in my life, and it's something that I've been missing a lot. And I'm not taking any single full-time job doing anything. I'm actually kind of going into being a subcontractor and a freelancer so that I have the time to work on some of my own projects. But I really hope you guys ask me back.
I have plans for you, Rob.
What motivated this change to want to work with your hands again all the full time, Rob? I
mean, it's something from the day that I came back to Taunton 3 or 4 years ago. It's something that's always been on my mind. It's something I've wanted to. It's the kind of work I've wanted to do since I was probably 18 years old, and I've kind of gone back and forth to it over the years. I think like many artists, you're sort of afraid to jump in with both feet to the thing that you think you love most, because you're afraid if you're either going to hate it, or you're going to make it something you don't like anymore, or you're going to fail and you're
going to go broke.
Yeah, well, that too.
Yeah, there's that.
And the good thing is that I've done so many different things in my life that I have a lot of different skills. So I can continue to write and edit and produce videos and do podcasts, hopefully, and
write green home articles for GBA.
Sure, whatever you guys want. But I at the same time I just wasn't finding that I was not making time for the creative work that really makes me happy. So,
well, I found it interesting. Coincidentally, National Public Radio had a story on Morning Edition this morning about 20 million people have quit their jobs who were gainfully employed during the COVID outbreak. And
it's called the Great Resignation.
Yeah, I heard it also called as quidditch.
Yeah, me too. I heard that story. Yeah, I like that too. That was clever.
Yeah.
So do you think that's part of it, Rom? This caused you to reevaluate your life choices?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I guess I've partially been inspired by a lot of other people too, who I see, local business owners who were really successful at their work, but realized that there were things they wanted to do. And I think honestly, the major changes during all of this COVID craziness have sort of shaken people up. It's kind of like I say it's kind of like that in that movie Wall-E, when the people are floating around on those little hover cars and staring at their computer screens, and they have no idea that there's this big world around them. You fall off one of those things, and you're like, wow, there's actually more going on here. And I don't know. I think that's kind of what it's like for me.
I only know that reference because of you, Rob, which is why I'm going to miss you.
I'm going to send you a video. I'll send you a video.
You have to watch that movie, Kylie.
I don't know if I can stomach the whole movie. I watched the trailer and I feel like I got it.
It was very prescient, I got to say.
Yeah.
But I have to say, it's been a really tough choice. I mean, it's something I've been thinking about for a long time because, one, I love working with all you guys, and and I've said this to many people before. When I'm working on a house as a carpenter, I can help one family make their environment, their space a little bit better. But if I write an article or produce a video, I can potentially help thousands and thousands of people do the same thing. And that's
get above your station, Rob. That's what I tell you.
Well, I'm not saying when I write it, even if I publish it on the website,
all of this migration by the masses away from existing jobs toward new career options has me feeling so grateful that I love my job. I love working for Taunton. I love GBA. I love Fine Homebuilding. And how wonderful is that? I'm lucky.
That's great.
I'm lucky that I don't feel a pull in a different direction. I feel like there's lots of opportunity for me right here. And
well, I think you're totally right. And you need gainful employment because you're going to have to put in a new well. Let's get to that.
There's that. As a sole earner, I don't have that luxury. Right? Patrick has been hearing my woes. So I just have something interesting to share, and I would really love for listeners to respond with anything they know about it. I have, after much investigation, it's been determined that I have what's called a sand point well. And I have reached out to Michael Maines, Martin Holliday, a couple of other people regarding this system, this well system, and very few people, well, none of them had heard of it.
Well, hold on here, Kylie. Let's ask Jeff and Rob if they had heard of this well technology. Jeff, have you heard of this?
I have heard of it. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know the name.
How about you, Rob?
I hadn't heard about it. I did a little bit of poking around after Kylie mentioned it to me the other day, and there's a little bit of information out there on it, but I haven't dug in deep enough to completely even understand what it is.
Kylie, can you briefly tell us how your well works?
I can. It's, well, first of all, conditions need to be right for this type of system, and I happen to have those perfect conditions, which is I'm 80 feet from water. In this case, it's a river. You don't have to go down too deep if you have super sandy soils, which I do. I have a sandy riverbank. And you have to have a high water table. And so my house was built in 1930, and that was the perfect solution for what was at that point a seasonal cottage. Now, after however many years it's been in the ground, I don't know if it was put in 1930, but it's been in there for a long time, judging from the look of it. It's essentially a sugar cone ice cream cone shaped,
I'm glad you made the distinction of sugar cone because it's the one with the pointy end, right?
Exactly. It has a pointy end. Right. It's not a wafer cone, it's a sugar cone. And it's full of holes. And it's such a simple system. It just gets spiked into the ground. In my case, it's 20 feet down. And then it connects via probably, in my case, a 1-inch pipe to my, input. It goes to the pressure tank, and there's a check valve between, and it feeds the tank. But over time, one of two things can happen. Those holes get plugged up, and the pipes, which are probably steel, have corroded on the interior, and so it has narrowed the pipe. And anyway, the result is really poor water pressure to the point where it takes about a half an hour to get wet in the shower. So that's getting old. I'm living with that after 2 months. So anyway, the struggle is, after much investigation and replacing my tank and lots of troubleshooting and, putting in a new check valve, and Nobody will work on these. This is what I want listeners to chime in on. I've been told that nobody will either fix what I have or put in a new one, that I need to drill a new well, which of course is gobs and gobs of money. You can get a sandpoint well, from what I gathered, between $300 and $1,000, which is a whole lot less than drilling a new well. And especially when you have a complicated site, that would require a variance. So what I want to know is, am I being fed a whole bunch of lies about nobody will work on this kind of system, nobody will install it, or are people just looking for me to drill a new well because it's so much more money? That's what I want to know. So if anybody has experience with sandpoint wells, please write in.
So about how big is that cone? Do you know?
It's tiny. It's probably, I mean, I got to look at it. It's probably 8 inches at the mouth. You know, and it comes down to a point.
So basically all it is just a water pickup stuck into a sandy reservoir.
Yeah. It doesn't require a drill. I mean, it's literally like
they're pounded in, as I understand. And I think, you know, in the old days, you'd keep threading on steel pipe until you got to the depth that you wanted, and you would keep driving it deeper until you reached the aquifer.
What I found kind of interesting is that it's abutted right to the foundation of the house. Typically, your well is much further away from, you know, your house. So it was a learning experience. I'm disappointed to learn.
Is this something we can make in my metal shop, maybe? I got some stainless steel lying around.
There's a piece of me that thinks, I feel like I know people who could just do this, you know? Like, it seems...
I don't think it's high-tech at all.
It's not at all high-tech, which is the beauty of it.
I mean, that's the thing, is back in those days, a lot of times people would be making stuff like that for themselves. I mean, I've got a drill press from some old farm from that time period that's made out of old car parts. And
was it used for drilling wells?
No. I mean, it was just a regular shop drill press. But I mean, what I'm saying is that farmers, you know, people who lived off the land knew how to. They had to know how to do stuff like that, because there wasn't going to be anybody in a rural town like yours 100 years ago who you could hire to do it. You know.
Well, I guess, the guy that exposed it said he was an old timer. He said, "There's nobody around here."
Well, so what I would worry about, Kiley, is, you know, you're really close to the driveway that comes into your little community, right? So what happens if the oil truck tips over and spills oil, you know, into the sand surrounding your house, and then it's going right into your well? That's the worry.
That is the least of my worries. I have so many other things going on in this property.
She'll be out there directing the oil truck, so that doesn't happen. I understand. Jeff, what's going on with your railing?
Didn't do a whole lot last weekend on it. Did some fall cleanup, but did order the parts for the cable rail. So,
ooh, ouch. Okay, so can I take a stab at what that's going to run?
Sure.
I'm going to say $1,100.
A little more, but it's like 14.
Okay,
that's better than 10,000.
Yeah. Much better.
You don't need a home equity loan for.
And at least you can look at it, unlike a well, which is just like a hole in the ground, right?
Right. You get to see it in the
your money.
Right.
I got nothing to report except to say that, you know, Rob dragged me away from the home projects this Sunday, and it was probably a good break for me. We went to a classic car show in Greenwich, the Concours d'Elegance. And it was a very joyful experience. And thanks for that, Rob.
Is that a traveling show? I feel like I've seen that.
There's different Concours events around the world.
It just means a fancy car show, Kiley.
Yeah, they're usually pretty hoity-toity things. The reason I go to those is because you go to the local car shows and you kind of see the same hot rods and muscle cars over and over again, which I enjoy. But you go to a show like this and you see some of the most unique cars from all history.
You forgot to mention that you can wear your hat in an environment that is doesn't take notice.
Right, you fit right in.
Yeah. It was a good day.
It was fun. So this comes from Rick, who we've heard from before, but, you know, Rick heard our appeal to answer the call about where does the energy go when you're dealing with a highly reflective surface, right? We had this conversation about the whitest paint ever made, and I asked the question, so where does that heat go? And Here's what Rick had to say, and it's a long email, but it's well written, so I'm going to do the whole thing. You guys ready?
Sure.
Lay it on us.
He says, Patrick, I'm in the Charlotte area. I always wanted to be a builder, but had a flair for physics in school and had a career in fiber optics for 20 years. The FHB podcast has bumped up against the physics of emissivity and electromagnetic radiation a few times, and it seems useful to explain a few concepts. Finer points will be glossed over as we're building houses, not designing satellites. When we talk of heat moving around, radiation is often mentioned but rarely detailed. That radiation is called electromagnetic radiation and includes visible light, radio waves, microwaves, heat lamps, IR, UV, gamma rays, etc. It's all fundamentally different frequencies of the same stuff, and the keyword is electromagnetic spectrum. When building scientists speak of longer or shorter wavelengths of radiation or light, this is what they're referring to. The wavelength and frequency of EM radiation are inversely related. The wavelength of EM radiation in a vacuum multiplied by the frequency always equals the speed of light in a vacuum. I'll stick the frequency here, but others will refer to wavelength. Tomato, tomato. Everything, pretty sure black holes count, emits a fairly broad EM radiation curve as a function of its temperature. Hotter objects emit EM radiation curves with peaks at higher frequencies. This is how those non-contact thermometers work, as well as those thermal FLIR cameras. Most light bulb technologies follow these curves. That's where light bulb color temperature comes from. As an example, sunlight matches the curve for an object at 5,778 degrees Kelvin, and tungsten filaments in light bulbs actually are running at 2,700 degrees Kelvin. The shape of these curves are different across our eye's perception. See Planck's laws for figures. Emissivity is simply a measure of how much material will emit EM radiation as a ratio to an ideal black body and varies from 0 to 1. Pick the material with the most amount of emissivity over 0.9 and you can radiate away heat, super white paint, water, Brian, etc. I don't know why he picked Brian. He must think he's cooler than the rest of us, right? Pick materials with the least emissivity, less than 0.1, and you can retain heat, mostly metals and things that are polished. This is why IR thermometers don't work well on metals or polished surfaces. I don't think either one. Oh, Kiley, you were in on the beer can debacle.
I remember that.
Yes.
Yeah, this put me in mind of it. Mm-hmm. That was fun.
What was missed on the podcast discussion regarding Boilermaker white paint is that objects emit EM radiation regardless of the temperature of the environment they're in. They emit due to absolute temperature, full stop. An object in the vacuum of space or in a bowl of oatmeal will emit the same. So if the material can emit well enough but also reflect the incoming EM radiation, the material will cool. Simple enough, but not at all intuitive because our daily experience is so tied to thermal conduction. Of course, a cool material attached to house framing will conduct heat out of the framing and into the material. So real-world effect will be muted, but it will passively cool the house. So where does the heat go? The atmosphere is nominally transparent, so most of the EM radiation goes out to space. Some narrow windows of that radiation can be absorbed by gas particles in the atmosphere, heating them. As those particles radiate their own EM radiation at other frequencies, figure half of that energy released will go back to heating the Earth, and the other half will go into space. A few get intercepted along the way by other particles, but let's not watch Inception again. I haven't seen that movie, so... The emissivity of glass is 0.95-ish, while the emissivity of metal is 0.4-ish. Coat a window with a little metal, and you can move the emissivity to 0.2 or so. Now the window will radiate away 1/5 of the heat it would otherwise take on. Nice. Brand it as a low-E window and hire a sales team, and you have a product. As for most objects, their emissivity is equal to their absorption. Objects that emit heat will also tend to absorb it well. Making paint that reflects heat while still emitting heat is the Purdue accomplishment. Do you guys know what that means? What's the Purdue accomplishment?
Well, Purdue is where that paint was made.
Oh, I was
I'm glad
thinking
you
it
pay
was...
attention to this show, Jeff.
I listen to it more than anybody.
Yes, you do. I'm sorry about that. Radiant barriers simply reflect EM radiation without asking for papers, regardless of which side LP wants to put it on and regardless of which side the framers put up. 5700K sunlight heats shingles, which radiate their heat at 400K. I'm guessing it means 4,000 K. And instead of radiating the heat back to the rest of the house, it is reflected back into the shingles, which warms the shingles further, maybe to 422. The warmer shingles dissipate heat to the atmosphere and radiate away the heat as EM radiation at a lower frequency. The radiant barrier continues to reflect the heat back at the shingles and never gives up the fight. This rabbit hole is well covered on Wikipedia and starts with the following terms: electromagnetic spectrum, electromagnetic radiation, emissivity, blackbody radiation, and Planck's law. Sidebar: finding a formula to describe the exact type of electromagnetic radiation emitted by steel blast furnace ovens at certain temperatures was a big industrial problem in the 1880s and was not found until 1900. The theoretical explanation of this equation didn't happen until 1924 and required a literal quantum leap to solve the problem, which was the impetus for the creation of quantum mechanics. Keep your attic sealed, Rick. Rick, that was fantastic. I don't know what he said mostly, but I think I get most of it.
90% of that went over my head, but man, I believe every word of it.
It just reinforces
That's so
my
impressive.
regret for not becoming an engineer, because I'm not smart enough to follow everything he was talking about, but I could listen to him talk for hours.
Right.
I think the long and short of it, and I had to read this 4 or 5 different times, is that he's reflected back into space. Some of it gets trapped up in the atmosphere, but as it heats up, it's going to have more impetus to move it into space, back into the atmosphere. So the simple question is answered for me.
Yeah, the other big takeaway is that people get so confused because the only radiation that the only heat transfer that we can really wrap our heads around is conduction and convection, because it's just how most of our heating plants work. But radiation is just something you'd think that the space around it would have something to do with it, but it doesn't. It's like if the surface color or type of material is right, it will radiate no matter what.
I think this is why when we talk about radiation barriers, people just glom onto that and find it so interesting. It's, for whatever reason, it's a concept that's not easily grasped. I guess maybe that email explains it. Why it's not easily grasped.
This is from our editorial advisor and friend, Mike Guertin. He says, regarding the flashing question from Mike, I'm a nerd for flashing and siding, so I couldn't wait to get home and look at the photos you described of listener Mike's house.
That's an understatement, by the way. He's a nerd for flashing. Mike is like the king of flashing.
The flashing installed over the head trim is sloppy. It's a little short on the end of the head trim, and there's not much of an outward slope. And it appears to be 0.011 inch thick metal rather than the IRC required 0.019 inch metal. This type of subpar flashing is commonly stocked at building material dealers, unfortunately, so it's what most contractors default to. Otherwise, the flashing installation looks like it will shed water perfectly fine because of the way the trim is applied over the top of the siding. I disagree with you and Mark that the trim over the siding is incorrect. I looked closely at the photos, and the products are LP SmartSide. The SmartSide instructions have alternate installation details showing trim applied over the top of the siding. I realize it's a shocking sight to see the trim over the siding, but it is a viable option. I believe it's a more water-resistant detail than leaving the required 3/16 inch gap between the lap siding and trim and caulk joints. Narrow caulk joints are nearly impossible to execute properly, and they need periodic replacement. The paint coating on LP SmartSide lasts 15 plus years before needing a rake coat, and that is often longer than the caulk seal lasts. Homeowners are rarely alerted to the fact that these caulk joints need periodic removal and replacement on a schedule that doesn't match the long durable paint finish available today. And I have yet to meet a painter who takes the time to carve out the old caulk before applying a new bead. Usually painters just smooge a surface applied coat of caulk over the old one. You may recall the window flashing issue I brought up at the Midwest Building Science Symposium a few weeks ago, where water that enters the siding to window joint doesn't get kicked out at the windowsill level and ends up rotting the sheathing directly beneath the corners of the window. This happens even with caulk joints. I began applying trim over all types of lap siding and shingles about 30 years ago on new homes and residing jobs, including my own, and I wouldn't do it any other way. I switched primarily to eliminate caulk joints and minimize maintenance, and I feel I'm in good company too. Tim and Brian Euler have been applying trim over siding for many years. They researched and experimented and feel it's a better option even in their wet Pacific Northwest climate. Brian posted a photo of window trim applied over cedar clapboard on a building built in the early 1900s So we aren't the first generation to go against the grain. The two biggest complaints I hear from builders and siders about the trim over siding detail is that it doesn't look right and bugs are going to nest in there. To the first complaint, I point out that there are lots of details that were done traditionally in a world of different materials and building assemblies that we now know we need to do differently. Think current good practices of installing kick-out flashing and leaving space of 1 or 2 inches between siding and the roof surfaces on roof-to-wall connections. To the second complaint, there are more bugs nesting in those crannies than in any sheltered place, like under the butt joints in siding or beneath soffits. Did I read that right? There are no more bugs nesting in those crannies than in any sheltered place, like under the butt joints or beneath soffits. He goes on. I'm always delighted when the podcast team offers conclusions to a construction situation that may not be accurate. It gives me and other listeners a chance to bring more information to the ongoing discussion of construction practices, what works, what doesn't work, and situations like this where there are alternative methods that can perform just as well, maybe even better.
So would you say
I'm
that's
always
like,
delighted when Mike can point out things we get wrong too. That's super.
oh, you mean it's not intentional? We're not like provoking people on purpose?
That was some good stuff.
I just pulled up a photo because I wasn't on that episode, and I just pulled up a photo of somebody who installed some hardy plank trim over some cement board siding, and to my eye, after years of doing window casings, exterior casings, the way that most people think they should be done, it's like it looks like an afterthought, like somebody just slapped that up there, but it really does make a lot of sense. I mean, think about how hard it is to get water to not go into those corners that you have to create when you set a casing into the siding around the corner of a window, right?
It still looks really
it's almost
goofy.
like
it does.
Looks bad.
In my mind, if it almost functions as a rain screen.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that you're not trapping the water because the only joints are vertical.
Right.
Whereas if you have a casing, if you have the head casing that's a shelf, water is going to sit on top of there and be directed down into the wall. That being said, there's a lot of ways you could get your slashing details right, and pitch the tops of any exterior trim details to shed water better. This
is one of those cases where we just need to get over it in terms of the aesthetics, right? If it functions better,
maybe you can get over it. I cannot get over it, and I don't think I should be obliged to.
Arguably, I haven't seen a picture of it.
Yeah,
it looks pretty schlocky.
It looks really weird. Yeah, but is it easier to install? From what Mike shared,
well,
it seems like
it's better water management, I think, is Mike's point.
Yeah, I don't anticipate that I'll be doing a whole lot of window and door casings that way.
I think if you did that around here, people would fire you, honestly.
Yeah.
Boy, it must look really, really shoddy. But Mike does
looks
beautiful
like
work. So how can
it
that
looks
be?
like an applique. It looks like something that was just sort of slapped on there, like a set, like a stage set.
What do you think about that, Jeff? Would you do that?
I would have to really, if the instructions said to do it, I would do it, but I really wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah.
You know how I avoided that in my barn? I just ran the siding right up to the edge over the edge of the windows. So I don't even have trim.
My barn has, channel vertical siding, and that's how that's installed, right? And it's pain if you have to replace siding around the window, but it makes some things easier. This comes from Dave in our regular mention of Fibafuse drywall tape. He had some thoughts. Hi, it was mentioned, and not for the first time, in episode 396 that Fibafuse drywall tape couldn't be used for inside corners because the edge of the taping knife causes it to tear. However, I can confirm that inside corner tools, either professional grade or the clunky corner knives sold in big box stores, work fine for bedding the tape in corners without tearing. Shockingly, I learned this by reading the manufacturer's instructions. I first heard of Fibafuse tape when Justin Fink mentioned it on the FHB podcast several years ago, and it has helped me, as someone who finishes drywall only occasionally, achieve good results more quickly and easily, especially for patches and repairs. I'll never use mesh tape again. Thanks so much for the podcast. I always find it entertaining and instructive, and I enjoy the personalities of all the regulars. Best regards, Dave. Thanks, Dave. So if you guys know what he's talking about, is one of those corner trowels that's got, blades on both sides forming roughly a 90-degree angle. And it's how amateurs or folks who are less experienced choose to do inside corners because they're easily the most difficult thing to tape, right? But
yeah, And the
I
nice
hate
thing
them.
about those, if for
I remember you saying
his
that.
purpose, is that they're usually not a sharp 90-degree
Mhm.
corner. It's like because it's a bent piece of sheet metal, so that way you're not getting the corner of a trowel cutting into the tape, is what he's saying.
Dave, use paper tape in inside corners. You're going to find it's much easier. And you don't actually put compound on the paper tape. It's more just like a screed bar is how I would describe it. You're actually filling the tape to the outside edge of it and using the tape as the, straight corner. It works great. And it's less expensive than Fibafuse, but I do like Fibafuse too. Oh, this comes from Chris. This is, I'm hoping you'll weigh on this, Rob. I'm going to take it first, but hi all. I love listening to your podcast and reading the magazine from front cover to back cover. I hate it when my wife scrolls ahead. No spoilers! I'm currently in middle management in the manufacturing software industry and would love to move back toward the construction industry as a career. Besides pursuing the we're hiring pages of the companies advertised in the magazine, are there any sites or concentrated sites for listing general construction or construction adjacent jobs? Thanks, Chris.
So, when
Does this
my
sound
wife
familiar,
Michelle,
Rob?
yeah, well, I'm going to tell you another quick story first. When my wife Michelle was no longer working at Fine Gardening and started to think about what she was going to do next, she literally started looking around at companies that were close by, and just sending out nice emails to them about what she liked to do. She was very honest about what she wanted to do. In her situation, she was able to offer the starting in a part-time job, so it was less of a commitment for people. But the point is that I found that some of the best opportunities that we've both found have been just by reaching out to people in your community, whether it be people you know already, asking around. I really think that we're so conditioned to thinking that you want to look for listed job openings. A lot of times, people are willing to hire, and they just don't have the time to even think about it. And it's just like it's on their to-do list, and they're so busy because the process of looking for and hiring people is such a labor intensive process that you may find that there are people in your community that already need help. And by going to the ones, searching for the people, either through people or just sort of searching around your community, you get to sort of choose the company as opposed to just looking for the available opportunities that someone has bothered to put out an ad for. I mean, when I went out on my own the first time, the guy I ended up working with mostly was someone I met in like our birthing classes. He just happened to be a contractor, and we were chatting, and I got to know what kind of work he was doing, which sounded really interesting to me. So I reached out to him, and then another time I reached out to somebody that just happened to be another carpenter that was on a job that I was working on, who I knew was out on his own. And I just really find that networking, word of mouth, searching out the companies that you want to work for and asking if they need help as opposed to looking for people that are asking for help. Numerous times that has given us the best opportunities.
I'm going to comment here, and then I'm going to ask Jeff or Kiley to weigh in. But so what Rob is saying is you want to work for the right company. It's really easy, I'm sure, to get a job in construction right now, but it's got to be the company you want to work for. You could be a flying monkey, or you could have a great job. You could work with really obnoxious people or have great coworkers. You got to find what the company that you want to work for before you jump in, I would say, and figure out what kind of construction you want to do. I mean, the options are limitless. I think you need to do some soul searching first, and then find an employer who can answer what you need so you can give them your best work. What do you think, Jeff or Kiley?
I'll jump in.
Go ahead.
I think that's excellent advice. I've had similar experiences, Rob. I will say that to get a sense of the kind of job that you might want, if you don't already have that nailed down, I did a quick search on LinkedIn this morning. I know that seems like a dinosaur of a site, but it is. And in fact, NPR did a story on it this morning about it being the number one place for people to search for jobs. So my point being that you might not get a job that way, but it will give you lots of job descriptions to go through to get a sense of the skill sets required, the positions available, the types of companies, type of work they're working on. I think it's a good resource to just, 40 pages of of construction related jobs and a quick search, there's going to be some information there that you can use. That's what I would do.
Yeah, and of all this,
As you guys chuckle, I think it's
no, not at all. In fact,
worthwhile.
even as a social medium for us, it's like LinkedIn is sort of
Underrated.
the closest thing. It's the closest thing to the original sort of pure sense of what a social medium was. It's
very
a
smart
virtual
people
way
use
to
it.
interact with people as opposed to just a place to sell ads.
And when you juxtapose something like LinkedIn to TikTok, you'll see the depth and breadth of what LinkedIn has to offer. I have a wonderful.
But no one's putting my dancing videos up on LinkedIn, Kylie. Jeff, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think, the idea that going outside of, traditional channels to find the job is a good way to go. It's like, I was thinking back, and it's like, I think in my life, I've gotten 2 jobs from ads, and everything else has been through knowing someone or meeting someone.
Good jobs often aren't even advertised. It's someone that you think that can do the job, and you reach out to them directly, right?
I will say it's a different age than we are all accustomed to. Let's
How
bear
so,
that
Kylie?
in mind. Well, word of mouth is excellent, but I don't think it's as prevalent as it once was. I feel like people are using social media more regularly, whatever platform it is, to find the right candidates. There's a lot of screening that goes on. And I understand construction is a little bit, it's a different industry, the trades in general. But I do think a hybrid approach to finding what you're looking for makes better sense than just, talking to your buddy at a bar about what he's working on,
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. I think we've kind of all hit on sort of different facets of the same idea that you that don't just go and look for the ads in the big job finding boards. Go to a more local or custom sort of experience or personal experience to find these things.
Jeff, I think you'd agree, based on one of our more recent pro talks, that the solar industry offers great opportunities for growth, and they need so many people. The industry is growing so fast. If that's at all appealing to you, Chris, what I would tell you about it is you get to do a lot of different things if you're a solar installer. It's important work for the planet, and you're helping people save money on their utility bills, which seems like kind of a cool thing.
Totally.
Oh boy, this is another long one. This comes from Abby. Abby's going to be homesteading in Ontario, and she wants to know how to get started. So I'm going to read her letter. Hi team, I'm an avid listener of the FHB podcast and especially love the Keep Craft Alive content. My husband Greg and I also enjoy the magazine for many years. Thanks for all you do. We're getting ready to build our forever family homestead on our 100 acres of forested land in Ontario, Canada. The site is an elevated flat area on the north side of an east-west gently flowing river. We're looking to build a home that is off-grid, mostly solar powered, and we're hoping to use a lot of our own lumber to build the place. Our plan is to purchase a sawmill in the spring to cut and dry our own red oak timbers. I know red oak is not everyone's top choice for timber framing, but it's what we have in abundance here. We also have a lot of balsam fir, so it's a possibility we could stick frame with that. We've done many sketches of our would-be house. It's a 3-bedroom, 2,700 square foot building, but we would love to build this house with utmost consideration and care, and when it comes to a very well thought out design. So we need professionals. I'm a recent cancer survivor, and on the heels of that, it's important to build a clean, healthy home that is high performance, but also breathes naturally and is built of good, wholesome, non-off-gassing, non-toxic ingredients. Though we both work, our intention is to make this home a working homestead and to eventually add a greenhouse, fruit orchard, vegetable garden, and possibly some small livestock. We will do much of the building ourselves and hire subcontractors locally that we already know, but we really want to get some good help with the design. Building this home on this particular land is something deeply important and meaningful to us. We've already owned the property for 6 years and have been mindfully getting to know it and are finally getting ready to build. And although I have an entire notebook full of sketches, the truth is I am not a designer or architect, and we really want to get this place right. And though Greg is a builder, we both have realized that we know enough to know that what we don't know, so to speak. We're not experienced timber framers. Neither of us have direct experience building passive houses. We're not experienced in setting up off-grid. Basically, Greg is familiar with building fancy summer homes for local cottagers, but that market is not yet concerned with high performance or natural materials or anything like that. We'd love to get some of that BS and beer culture going on up here because that movement doesn't really exist yet. So my question after all this is, where do we start? Is there a person/architect that exists who would come to our site, see our available trees and material, and help us design a house based on what is available for us to work with? And if this person/company also has a passion for building healthy natural homes, an appreciation for energy-efficient solar design, a history of designing a whole homestead and permaculture design layout, that would be amazing. Do these people exist? What do they call themselves? I would love to find this unicorn who can establish an order of events for lining up the right team of advisors to help with this labor of love project. Thank you for making your way through this incredibly long story/question. Also, if you think this build sounds unique and worth writing about, please let me know. Maybe we can share this adventure together as it unfolds. Abby. Thanks, Abby. Abby, that sounds like a great project. Oh my God. So Kiley, I asked you to dig into this. Is there an architect or some kind of design professional who works on folks who want a homestead?
Well, I think we should broaden the focus a little bit here. It just so happens that in Peterborough, Ontario, which this Abby didn't specify what part of Ontario she is in, but potentially very close by, the Endeavor Center is a resource that you should really tap into. They are the founders of the Builders for Climate Action, and they provide hands-on education around high-performance, natural, and zero-carbon building. They're all about energy efficiency and climate-friendly materials and building methods. And Chris Magwood is the founder of the school, and he's a friend of the BS and Beer culture. And by the way, if you want to start a chapter in your area when you get your project underway, we can help you with that. Or before. And he's a tremendous resource. He has 7 books he's contributed of his own, and he's also contributed to the new carbon architecture. So I would start dipping into those resources. And there are different options. My point is, so they have courses, they have, that you commit to for a year. They have intensive workshops that you can do for a month. You can be part of a build from, beginning the foundation to the finishes. But I just think that this is an excellent place to tap into local resources. These are very knowledgeable people about the things that you want to do, from the landscape, like I said, to the finishes. But, call them, get involved with them, somehow make connections there, because they are going to be able to put you in touch with the architect, or the designer, the residential designer. There's opportunity there to enhance your building skills. It sounds like you folks already have a good fundamental base to work from, but I think you're going to learn. You could learn tons from them, and that's a guarantee. So I guess what I'm saying is that there's an excellent resource. It's globally renowned, and it's right in your backyard. And Chris Magwood, I have his email contact. He's very approachable. He can point you in all the right directions. And I would just go to their website. It's Endeavor, spelled Canadian, ENDEAVOUR Center, CENTRE.org. And
did you say spelled Canadian?
Spelled in the Canadian manner. Is what do you refer to that as? You know what I mean.
That's what I
OURTRE.
That's like saying that. Yeah, I speak American.
Right. Yeah. Point taken. Anyway.
I think that's fantastic advice, Kiley. I want to say that I think, the first step is decide what your budget is, because that's going to be the first question with any design process, right? And
these folks seem to have.
What's that?
Judging from all of the care they've taken and the things they want to accomplish, I feel like they have some money to work with. I could be wrong, but that's my impression.
Well, so homesteaders, and I count myself, if you can be a homesteader in suburban Connecticut, probably not. But, when you're doing stuff yourself, and, we've built a 75-foot by 75-foot vegetable garden since we moved here. We've built a 24 by 30-foot outbuilding workshop studio, it takes forever. So if you want this stuff to be producing vegetables right away, or if you want to have your shop to help build your house, it's either going to cost you money, your time, or you're going to have to make a compromise on one of those two things. So figure out how much money you can spend, and then figure out what building you need first and work to that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Patrick. Because like I think I mentioned this before. I've got a friend who the first thing he does when he starts a remodeling project on a new home that he purchases is set up the workshop. So if you could build even a temporary pavilion or shed or workshop, whether it be for where you're going to store and dry your timbers, or but certainly, I mean, that's we're getting ahead of things
Yeah,
there.
they're asking about the design of their house,
Yeah,
and they need help with that. And I mean, not to say that those points aren't valid. I'm just saying if they're looking for people who can inform this kind of a build, they need to talk to the people who are doing it.
yeah, and that
And I
sounds like
would,
the
you
perfect
know,
place.
if you're going to have to live in this place, you know, you may have to compromise on what the construction goals are, right? If you're not experienced timber framers, like you said, well, maybe the first building is not a timber frame and you can live in it while you learn how to be a timber framer, and maybe you build the second part of the house or the barn or the garage or whatever it is. But, you know, start with something you know how to do and get yourself some shelter, because, you know, living in an RV in, you know, rural Ontario could be kind of a drag.
You know, this reminds me of what Brian did to get, you know, he's building his house and he had a design in mind, and sounds like they've done some sketching. And so he took his sketches and he had a couple of different ideas about how he wanted to go about it. And then he sent it, and I know not everybody has the resources that we have at Fine Homebuilding, but he sent it to, who was it? The guy in Austin, Texas, who used to write for us a lot.
Pfeiffer?
No. God, I can't believe I can't remember his name. Anyway, he sent it. And if you can find somebody who can take a look at your sketches and help you kind of rough it out and sketch up, then you've got a design to get going with. And I thought that was a really smart thing to do.
Yeah.
It's
It
bugging me
sounds like
that
a
I
great thing, Abby. I hope you love it. And please do keep us posted on how it's going. I'd love to
Yeah,
hear
this
how this
sounds
is
like a-
going. Yeah.
article potential.
Here, Rob, here's another email from someone who's considering a career change.
Okay.
Hi, FHB podcast. My wife and I are planning to build a 600 square foot addition to the back of our house next spring. We have a good contractor who's done work for us before, who's both available and interested in our project, but I am pulled by the appeal of leaving my office job for a time and trying to build most of it myself. As a structural engineer with experience designing homes and renovations, I'm familiar enough with the process of home construction. However, my experience actually doing the work is limited to helping a good friend frame a small addition and some projects like a pergola or the odd home repair, but I have found those projects to be immensely satisfying. Does a project of this size seem like a crazy idea to take on? What do you think would be the biggest risks? One concern I have is that, especially in this very busy market, suppliers and subcontractors that I do not have an established relationship with will either treat me as their lowest priority or not even take my order. Lumber prices have come down, but it is still hard to come by engineered products in our area these days. Thanks for the thoughts, James. So 20 by 30, right?
20 by 30. Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, it's a sizable building. I certainly wouldn't want to be framing that by myself. You know,
Why?
if he's got some help, some big pieces there. I don't know, up high. I guess it really depends on how comfortable. I mean, if he's done some framing before, maybe he's comfortable with moving to the next level in this. I mean, I think there's just a bunch of variables you have to consider. It's like,
I think framing, it's the easy part. Like, what about the rest of it? You know, getting the excavation done correctly and the concrete foundation put in correctly and all the other parts of it.
sure. I mean that's one thing I wouldn't be tackling myself, would be foundation work. I might, you know, be a GC on my own projects just to coordinate all that stuff. But that's a lot outside of my comfort zone. But I guess it's just basically kind of, once you've got the thing designed. He says he's comfortable designing projects. He's done it before. So once you've got a design, just sort of break down the laundry list of steps that need to be done, and just sort of be honest with yourself about how comfortable you are tackling each of those parts of the project and which ones you want to farm out.
And similarly, I would also weigh, like, what is screwing up? How easy is it to fix? For example, a screwed up foundation is way harder to fix than, you know, some studs that are out of place, or, you know.
Sure. Or how fast you want to get things done. I mean, if you're framing that by yourself, like how much time does he have to take off to work on this project? I mean, it sounds like he's comfortable taking a sabbatical there if he's considering it. But
what do we think about the prospect that this is going to inform his engineering like nothing else ever has?
Yeah. Well, I honestly feel like anybody in a design or engineering field should spend some time,
Building
doing
stuff.
stuff with their hands, because what better way to understand how materials work, right?
Yeah. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, no, definitely. I would just keep going back to last week's podcast because we talked about that a lot.
So you guys, I don't think either one of you were here, but we had this large discussion generated by a reader question that says, like, I tried to pour this addition concrete slab, right, and then a couple sheds, and he's like, I struggled to a D+ finish. My hubris about not knowing this would be so difficult surprised me, and so he asked, what are the things that you think is not good for a DIYer to start out with?
Foundation.
Concrete was one of them.
Yeah. It's so time specific, right? You got to get everything just right, and you know from experience, Patrick, that if everything is not in place right when you need it, I won't it can be a problem. Where if you're framing rafters and you run out of lumber, you cut a rafter wrong, as long as it's not like a hurricane coming, that's going to knock the thing down, you just come back the next day.
What do you think about this, Kiley? Is this something that he should take on?
I think you guys gave him some straight up advice. I think foundations are the things that people who are not experts should not endeavor to do, because that's the basis of a good structure. And if you get that wrong, everything else is going to be wrong.
And if you get it right, everything is pretty easy that comes after. I don't know, James. I think it's a great opportunity. The great thing about an addition is, like, this could take forever, right? This doesn't have to be in a hurry. I mean, unless you have twins on the way or whatever, and you need 2 bedrooms. But for most of us, addition can take longer than a new build or what have you. So I think it's a great opportunity. I think it'll make you a better engineer, almost certainly.
The other thing you could do is start with a shed, because then you learn all the principles of, essentially framing, putting on a roof as a practice project.
Couldn't hurt. Or go to Habitat for a while. Right? No one's agreeing with that. That's fine. Guys
You said that work has changed quite a bit since you were been
Patrick.
there.
I haven't worked on many Habitat projects. So.
If you want to learn how to build houses for free, I'd say hard to beat it. This comes from John in Cincinnati. I recall a podcast episode, but can't find it now, where you discussed recommendations for the mortar mix and whether to use lime for repouring an old stone foundation. I recall somebody wisely suggesting consult a local mason, since the mix might vary from region to region. I think there was some discussion of the pros and cons of using lime. I think there were some other pearls of wisdom in that episode, so I was hoping to go back and re-listen. It's hard to say, John, if there are any pearls of wisdom.
I remember this discussion very clearly, and I spent, I would say, 25 minutes trying to find this podcast, and it made me realize how difficult it is to search the podcast archives. I had Matt look, I had Chris Casey look. I remember this was in, at least I think it was, Matt describing how to mix mortar in response to, this was about 2 years ago, actually, and I think, if I'm right, I was about to mortar my little retaining wall, and Matt kind of ran with the idea of how to mix mortar. And if I'm, anyway, I haven't given up. I'm really trying to find this episode, but it's not easy, and it should be easier.
Well, I'll tell you, we have mentioned lime mortars a few times, and it's always sort of come back around to me talking about my rubble foundation on my house. The last time I remember mentioning it was when William from Richmond, Virginia, was asking about whitewashing his chimney. And we were talking about how important it is to have materials that are compatible with the existing masonry. And every time I come back around to this, I dig in a little bit deeper and learn a little bit more about this stuff. And what I learned in this one, because Patrick, you know that I've been tearing apart this crumbling bricks on part of my foundation and replacing them. And I didn't bother to go get the lime mortar that I wanted to order because there wasn't available close by, and I got lazy and went to the local mason supply, and I talked to some old mason that I know who said, "Oh yeah, get the Type O mortar because it's like the closest thing to the original lime mortar because it's got more lime in it. It's
Is that
softer." And
true, Rob? Did your chemistry investigation prove that
well,
to be
no, it
correct?
is true. It's true and it's not true. So here's the problem, and this is the thing. It's like, so lime mortar was used for thousands of years, and Portland cement was invented in the late 19th century, and then kind of took over because the whole thing about Portland cement is this: it's fast and sets hard and fast. But unfortunately, that's not necessarily what you always want in a masonry wall. Like the benefit of lime mortar is that it's more vapor permeable, it's softer, it's sort of self healing, and it's the mortar doesn't really do anything on a load bearing wall other than sort of be a bedding material to give a nice connection between irregular pieces of mortar. So um, even though the Type O mortar that I actually started using on my chimney, on my foundation, is so the closest modern equivalent in its softness, it's actually it's not as strong as other mortars, and so it's not necessarily ideal. So I started poking around with. I know there's a bunch of suppliers around the country for lime mortars, and when you're dealing with a house from the 1880s, you're
There's no doubt.
there's no
There's
doubt
like
it's got
there's
lime
no
mortar
doubt.
in it. So what I found is there's a company called limeworks.us. If you just go to limeworks.us, they have distributors all over, including a bunch of them in Ohio. The nearest one to him, unfortunately, is in Columbus, which isn't too far away. But the benefit of most of these places is because they realize that even the local mason yards don't understand, because nobody uses this stuff anymore. It's like once Portland cement was invented, we just forgot thousands of years of experience on how good that other product is. But it takes a little more fussiness and care and time, which is the main reason why people don't use lime mortar, I assume. But so what what they're saying is that you really got to kind of know what you're working with. So this company has a page where you fill out a form, send them a sample, and they will actually advise you based on the sample you send them on what mortar you should use. And they have
Does it
a whole.
cost money for that service, Rob?
No, I don't believe so, because they're trying to sell you a product, right? So this is a service they
I
provide.
know, but like,
That's
how
cool.
much money can you make on a $15 bag of mortar, right?
Well, so the thing is, these companies, because their line based products are so important to all the the saving of old buildings. They provide also a lot of education on their website. So if you there's a whole section on the website that talks about the different types of mortars that are available, and they have sort of a spectrum of everything from like a true soft lime mortar. And the thing about lime mortar is that it sets through carbonation. It actually sets through contact with carbon dioxide. So it's like totally opposite of Portland. It doesn't. You can put it in a bucket of water, and if you put a lid on it, it will stay soft forever. It
Hmm.
won't set up like concrete. And so that means that it actually relies on porous stone around it. And also, you don't want to point it. You don't want to tuck point it and leave a gap, because the whole point is you don't want a shelf where water can sit. Um, there's a
So
lot of
I'm going to
different.
ask for clarification of that, Rob, because admittedly my masonry skills are lacking. But you're saying if you're adding mortar to repoint a joint, you want it to not stick out beyond the plane of the stone face. Is that
Well, no,
correct?
what you actually want is you want it to be as flush as possible. Whereas, in a brick, you usually have it back maybe just a
Yeah.
little bit. And when people do stone walls for that they want to be aesthetic stone walls, even if they do a mortar joint, they typically leave the mortar back because they want to see just the natural
The
stone.
stone.
Well, in a stone wall, if you look at my old foundation, it looks like a smooth or continuous but bumpy surface, because the lime mortar comes right out to the surface.
Hmm.
And the
And
idea for that is you don't want water sitting on it.
you
Is
don't
that
want
correct?
water sitting on those edges. And something that I was intuitive to me, I had totally backwards. It's actually better for porous materials. It's easier to use lime mortar, like if you have limestone or brick or sandstone, where if you use granite or basalt, it doesn't have the access to get to the air, the carbon dioxide, to cure it properly. So it's
Hmm.
actually, they say to even do it in layers. But really, if you want to learn about this stuff, go to so limeworks.us is one. There's another place in Pennsylvania called Lancaster Limeworks, and these people are the people who know about this stuff. It's like, even if you find a local mason, like I talked to a guy who I totally trust, has been a mason for 40, 50 years. But masons in the past 100 years haven't been using lime mortar unless they're strictly restoration specialists. So, and there's all kinds of other things too. Like for instance, the sand is crucial. Like the actual type, size, shape of sand. Like think about how, like when you use processed stone as a driveway base, as opposed to like evenly graded gravel. Like if you just did 3/8 gravel on a driveway, you drive over it and your tires would sink in. But if you use a processed stone, which has fines and all different sizes of gravel of just the right shape, it packs like concrete. Well, that's the same idea with the aggregate in a lime mortar. The lime is just a binder, and the aggregate is what's really doing the heavy lifting. So the sand choice is crucial too. So there's a bunch of things that you really kind of got to know what you're doing, and the people who have the resources to help you with this are the people who are supplying these products.
That's great advice, Rob. Patrick,
Great
have you
advice,
done a
Rob.
pro talk with a mason yet?
No. Oh, I didn't know. I haven't, but I would love to.
Yeah, I mean, I would
You
love
should
to hear
probably
that.
call up one of these guys, because I've talked to the guy from Lancaster, and he loves to talk about this stuff. So I'll see if I can track him
Fascinating.
down.
That'd be great. It's it's certainly something that none of us have any qualifications to talk about, right?
Yeah. Now I'm going to go. I'm not sure if I'm going to go and dig those bricks out that I put the type of mortar on, or if I'm just going to be like, well, I only did a few of them.
Well, so
with that.
the worry is much less. So I would argue that unless it's subject to freeze thaw and the inside of your basement is not, hopefully, it's a lot. The risk is much lower. The risk is when you have freezing conditions and you have this unyielding Portland cement based mortar. Something's got to give when it freezes, and that means it's going to be the stone that's going to start spalling. Instead of with the traditional lime mortars, they will yield a little bit seasonally, right?
Yeah, and the main thing is that Portland cement, once it's hard, it's hard. It's like a chisel. It's basically chiseling the face off of your bricks. And because masonry can move, especially in a freeze thaw environment, it'll move a little bit or it'll settle over time. And the lime mortars, being flexible, soft, and kind of self healing, will actually move with the stonework.
It's amazing chemistry. Like it's at least as complex as EMF, and supremely white coatings.
This is Matt's realm of expertise.
Is he
among other
calling now?
things.
Is that who's calling?
No, it's not my phone.
Jeff, do you have anything to say about lime mortar, Portland cement mortar in general?
I have almost no experience with any of it, so
I can tell you it's all way harder than I thought it would be.
yeah.
Well, Rob, we're going to miss you, but I'm, delighted to say that I'm sure we'll still see each other and hang out on occasion, I hope.
Of course. Yeah, I'm going to miss you guys too. But like I said, I'm welcome. I'm happy to come back for an episode here and there if you
Well, we're going to have a special alumni show, and it might involve a Zoom call with more than one or two folk because,
I think we should all cram into the old podcast studio one of these
like
days.
8 or 9 people around the round table.
Yes.
Well,
That'd be a super spreader event.
The
I'm
pizza.
Sure.
I was actually messaging with Matt the other night, and I was like, maybe we need to do sort of like a after hours podcast recording. We'll have sort of a reunion, but not in the studio like this. We'll go out for
That'd
drinks
be fun.
on a Friday
like
night.
in the spirit of a BS. In the spirit of a BS cat. Yeah.
Brett.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to ask our listeners to weigh in on that concept. If you would like an after hours podcast with some Fine Homebuilding alumni, and I'm going to invite myself because I want to be part of this disaster, please send an email to the podcast email box, and we'll see if we can get that done.
I love it when I get volunteered to work.
Jeff.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Jeff, Rob, and Kiley for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Thanks very much for listening.